Shetland Isles, with their history of knitting, always fascinate me. I like meeting people from there. It's my dream to go there one day and maybe even participate in Shetland Wool Week, which is approaching soon. It's going to be from September 24th till October 2nd this year. Unfortunately, I can't make it there this year, but I'm hoping one day I'll visit Shetland during Shetland Wool Week. I love meeting people from there because they're so humble. They always tell me that, the next village, somebody needs even better than me, even faster than me. They're no nonsense, they're practical, they're resourceful, they know how to multitask. If you think about knitting belt, the idea of knitting belt was because women needed to multitask. They never sit with idle hands. Even when they go to neighbors to visit, they bring their knitting with them. And the history of knitting in Shetland Isles really fascinates me. There are so many different techniques, there is so many different things that they knit and knit beautifully. I interviewed a few people from Shetland, and I highly recommend you to watch those interviews because they are very shy and humble, but yet easy to smile, easy to laugh, and they're very open people. So I have an interview with Alison Rendall. I have interview with Hazel Tyndall, who is like one of the fastest knitters in the world. There is also a very charming interview with Anne Yunson, the lady who knitted her own Shetland lace fence. And when I told her that one day I'm dreaming to see that fence in person, she said, well, if you see that fence, you better knock on my front door. And I love that sense of hospitality that I get from Shetlanders. I also interviewed Elizabeth Williamson, who is Shetland born and raised, and she's a Shetland lace designer who is going to be teaching this year at Shetland Wool Week. So if you're going, please take that class and tell me how you liked it. So today I want to talk about three of my favorite books about Shetland lace. And the very first book I want to tell you about is this book by Elizabeth Lovick called Magical Shetland Lace Shawls to Knit. And basically, the story of me discovering this book was one day I was scrolling on Instagram and I saw this beautiful lace. So I talked to the person who posted it, who happened to be a Shetland lace designer, Monique Boonstra, and I asked her, what is it? So she told me about Shetland lace. I decided to study it further. So I went to the library and I asked them if they had any books on Shetland lace. And the only book they had in my local library was this specific book. And I really like this shawl that's on the very cover of this book. So that was my very first Shetland lace shawl that I knitted. And I learned so much from this book and knitting this lace. I used recycled cashmere to knit the shawl. It was on a thicker side, so I had to deal with all the sizing of the middle part to make sure that it wasn't too ginormous. But basically, the reason I really like this book is the way it's structured. So at the very beginning, Elizabeth Lovick talks about the history of Shetland lace. There are some beautiful pictures showing women of Shetland blocking it on traditional frames, and how the whole lace developed, how the nature inspires different designs, and how it affects the fleece also. So because it's such a like harsh, cold climate, the fleece is actually super fine, which makes it perfect for spinning for lace yarn. Later on, there is a chapter that's called Apprentice Pieces. And basically, in this chapter, there are a bunch of different shapes, and you can learn how to make either a wide triangle shawl, there is a circular shawl, there is also an inside out square. So you, through knitting this like little piece, you learn how the traditional Shetland lace shawls were created. There is an outside in shawl. So it shows all different kind of designs. And basically the way Shetland shawls constructed, there's three main elements in all of them. You have your edging, you have your border, and you have your center. So this apprentice part shows you how all those parts can be combined to create any shape of shawl. It also shows grafting techniques. It shows, there is a portion of it teaching you how to read the charts of Shetland lace. So there's a lot of explanation, and you're basically learning like all the basics with those apprentice pieces. Then once you try your hand at apprentice pieces, there is 15 different designs, and they range from, there's like beautiful triangle shawl, there is your typical square shawl, there is a cape. There is also some pieces for a baby that I really like. Like they have a christening shawl for the baby, but they also have this adorable bonnet and christening outfit. So a huge variety of designs, very clearly explained, like very easy explanations and directions to follow. And then toward the end, there is a chapter on techniques, and there is a whole description of like what kind of needles you could use, some tips and tricks about markers, what stitch markers to use, about lifelines and waste yarn and crafting. So basically everything and anything you need to know about Shetland lace. There is also recommendations of what kind of yarn you can use for what kind of project. So I really, really like this book because it just explains pretty much everything for the very beginners. So like anybody who haven't tried their hand in Shetland lace, you would find it extremely educational, easy to read, very clear, highly recommended. And in January of 2022, I was lucky enough to interview Elizabeth Lovick on my channel. If you missed that interview, it's episode 116, and I really recommend you to take a look at it because she's just so lovely and so knowledgeable and very inspiring person. I feel like she changed my life. She brought so much richness. I met so many people because of this first book, because I decided to try Shetland lace. So that interview holds a very special place in my heart, and I hope you will check it out. And I know you're going to love it because she's just impossible not to love. The second book I want to mention was created by Shetland Guild of Spinners, Knitters, Weavers, and Dyers. It's called A Legacy of Shetland Lace. It's a beautiful book, and it's basically a collection of different patterns that this guild put together with some autobiographies of the members that participated. There is also at the very beginning like pictures of detailed pictures of how to properly graft Shetland lace for different kind of stitches. There are also pictures of different blocking methods there and explanation of how to do it properly. All the tips and tricks for knitting. Some of these designs in the book are more complicated than others. Some of them are like really simple, but there's also some garments there. And I like that the book tells story of all the people who participated in creation of this book. But what I love about it is that a lot of these patterns allow you to try thicker yarns first. So you don't necessarily have to start knitting Shetland lace, jumping into cobweb. And let me tell you, when I started, because I came from like zero experience with Shetland lace or with lace knitting in that matter, I found when I first tried cobweb, I found it absolutely impossible to manage. So knitting this thinner yarn is definitely something that is a process. Like you should start with a little bit thicker yarn and make yourself comfortable with reading design and understanding how to read lace, and then try thinner and thinner yarn until you become comfortable with it. Also, the lighter the yarn, the easier it is to work with. So don't start with the black cobwebs. Start with light color fingering weight and work your way up there. I want to read you a poem from this book. It's called Knitting Tradition by Laura Friedlander. With the belt round her waist, she sat by the fire with the fine lace shawl laid up on the wires. In her heart, she would quietly sing as she knitted the shawl to slip through her own wedding ring. The stitches, the patterns, the tales that they gave, and in these patterns, her history was saved. Bird's eye, cat's paw, print of the wave. The following year, her son so small, wrapped up in tradition and the fine lace shawl. I love that poem, but I also love what it talks about, the fact that it's knitted traditions, like all these little designs that constitute Shetland lace. It's traditional designs that were transferred from one generation to another. So moms would show their daughters how to knit certain thing, and they would incorporate it into their designs. And at some point when you knit Shetland lace, you start seeing the same designs in different shawls, and it becomes like this familiar little friend, like you know already as soon as you start knitting it how to do it and what's coming. So you'll see like trees like this and like little flowers. You see them over and over again in many different designs. So highly recommend you to try this book. And my recommendation would be, if you're new to Shetland lace, just take a thicker yarn and try to make a scarf with one of those designs and see what's gonna happen. I actually did scarf like this for my mom. It's this design, and it's called Cookron Scarf by Sue Arthur. So I took just fingering weight yarn, and I knitted the scarf for my mom, and she absolutely loves it. She wears it all the time. The third book that I want to show you, they call it the Shetland Lace Bible. It's called Heirloom Knitting, a Shetland Lace Pattern and Workbook by Sharon Miller. And basically, it's just endless library of different designs. So it talks about history of Shetland lace, but it's also basically a book that, like, if you want to design your own Shetland lace shawl, you can take this book and you combine. So there is a part of this book that talks about different edgings. There is part of this book that talk about what kind of center motifs you could use. Like, for example, there, or there is a part that talks about different borders, like what can you put, what kind of border you can incorporate. So you could take basically elements from this book and combine them together and create your own Shetland lace shawl. There are also patterns for baby booties, baby christening gowns, different garments and how they are knitted, different suggestions. I mean, this book is basically has everything and anything you might want to know about Shetland lace. I find this book to be a little bit less beginner friendly and more for people who are already familiar with Shetland lace, because it just sort of assumes that you already knitted Shetland lace, you know what they're talking about. However, the first part of it, where there is a description of history of Shetland lace, kind of knitters were there, the historical background of Shetland lace, pieces in the museum, it's just like, I find it extremely interesting for anybody and everybody. So these are my 3 go-to books when it comes to Shetland lace, and I'll leave the names of them in the description of this video. But I also wanted to tell you about another very fun pattern that I like, that's not from the book, but you can find it on Ravelry. It's called The Marvels of the Sunless Sea by Hazel Carter. And what I love about this book, it sort of, to me, represents Shetland, because Shetland is surrounded by seas, and fishing is a huge industry there. Like majority of people you would hear when you talk to Shetlanders, they would talk how mom was knitting and dad was fishing. So fish and the sea, it's like a big part of living there. And this pattern talks about all different kinds of fish. They talk about ribbon fish and fang jaw and rough skate and glass lobster and hagfish. So the way that pattern is structured, there is edging, there is border, and then there is the main body of the pattern. So the borders have different kinds of fish in them. And when Hazel Carter wrote her pattern, she also put bits and pieces of information about the fish that you are knitting. So for example, ribbon fish, she gives you the proper name, Regalis glassne. It's also known as oarfish. It's silvery with the red crest and back ridge, and it may grow up to 50 feet long and is probably the origin of the sea serpent tails of sailors through the years. It usually lives in the depth of 3,000 feet or so and only surfaces when sick or dying. So by knitting this pattern, you'll also learn a lot about the creatures of the sea. You'll also learn about the plants that grow in Shetland, because the central panel of this shawl, represented by Shetland small patterns. There is bead, flower, leaf, fern, dewdrop, bird eyes. So there's all these kind of different little patterns that you learn how to knit. Highly recommend you this pattern. You're gonna love reading it. You're gonna love the description of it, and you're gonna learn so much. I hope you found this segment helpful, and I hope you'll try Shetland lace, because if you know how to knit two together, how to do slip, slip, knit, and knit three together and yarn over, you can knit Shetland lace. Give yourself permission to try. And those mistakes, we call them beauty marks. So just knit on. Thank you for being with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you liked it, please click that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, happy knitting.